Hello, my name is Matt Whitman. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour, and recently I have been doing science on human love. What I have discovered through the process of watching dozens of romantic comedies from the last 30 years is that approximately half of all human love begins when two attractive people with high-profile, high-pressure jobs meet and are forced to work together. Initially, they hate each other, but the reason is because they can see things about themselves in the other person and they don't like the way it makes them feel. Gradually, they get to know each other better as they're forced to work together on some contrived project. Through the influence of slightly less attractive but much more socially aware and loose friends, they are given good advice and discovered that perhaps they do appreciate things about the other person, and maybe it's time to quit being so difficult. Through the power of a montage, they begin to confess their feelings for each other, but the one thing that stands in the way of a truly lasting, meaningful, honest relationship is a deep, dark secret that one party has that they just can't bring themselves to tell the other. After more sound advice that they receive from their slightly less attractive but wiser friend, they decide it's finally time to fess up. However, they're interrupted by multiple plot contrivances and are unable to relay this difficult thing on their terms. Eventually, the truth comes out not on their terms. The other person is offended, and rather than having an adult conversation, gets on a plane or train or boat to go to another part of the world where the other person could never, ever, ever, ever find them to have said adult conversation, or they just decide to marry a monster immediately. Coming to their senses, the offending party tracks down the other party on a contrived timeline and confronts them with their love and a fall-on-the-sword apology in front of literally everyone so that they know how sincere and real it is. This always works and results in lasting, meaningful relationships. This is what Luke chapter 5 is also about in the Bible, and that's what we're talking about now. Wow, unexpected consequence. That genuinely took a toll on my eyes. These romantic comedies, I'm not kidding, half of them actually work this way. And once you see the pattern, you will see that that is just how they play out. I think Hallmark movies, it's more like 100%. They work out exactly this way. But there is something that's kind of effective about that moment, right? Where there's a timeline and you just can't hold back on the moment any longer because this is the moment to profess your love, and this thing is either going to sink or swim right now. And I wasn't joking a minute ago when I said that it's kind of like Luke chapter 5, because you got this scenario here where there is a moment, a time crunch. You have a paralytic, someone who isn't very mobile, probably because of the paralysis, and Jesus is in his town, and it's way too crowded, like an airport or a wedding or a soiree or a boat dock or a train station in a romantic comedy. You just can't get through to get to Jesus to tell him like, hey, my legs are busted up. I need some help here. And I believe that you can do that. And so in classic romantic comedy style, they've got to come up with a clever solution to get past the crush of people, not caring about the social consequences or embarrassment of proclaiming their belief in Jesus, to get to the one they need to get to see this miraculous thing happen. Was that a stretch? I don't think so. Did all of that happen just because I wanted to do that thing at the beginning? No, possibly. I think it really does connect kind of neatly. And so what we're going to be looking at here is Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 17. And what we've got is Jesus is really early in his ministry. If you remember last time around, he healed the guy with leprosy, which is like this gigantic social reach. People didn't do stuff like that. Am I still crying a little bit? I feel like I might still be crying a little bit. That really was somewhat painful. And so now we're in a situation where Luke is setting up anecdote after anecdote that demonstrates Jesus' character and authority over all kinds of different things, just lined up one against the next, so that we're very quickly, through showing, not telling, see, that's good writing, we're getting a sense of what Jesus is about, what he can do, and why people should believe in him. So verse 17 of Luke chapter 5 says, "One day as he was teaching, Pharisees and teachers of the law who had come from every village in Galilee and from Judea and Jerusalem were sitting there, and the power of the Lord was present for him to heal the sick." So you've got the religious leaders who have come up north to hang out with Jesus. Now, we're still early enough in the game that if you were the original audience and you're reading this, you're not really sure if the religious leadership, the Pharisees, the more personal behavior, law-oriented, believe in the oral tradition and kind of argue about the law types, or the very priestly, concerned with the life of the temple and religious rituals, much more wealthy Sadducee types, are going to sign off on the Jesus thing. Like, this would be kind of what makes something real in the mind of the original audience. Like, if these guys sign off, they're in charge of religion, it means Jesus is definitely good. So there would have been a little pins and needles here to see what happens when these guys show up. Is there going to be some miracles? Is Jesus going to kind of hit the big time? But if you've cheated ahead a little bit, and shame on you for doing so, then you know that actually it turns out to be quite the rivalry between Jesus and the Pharisees and Sadducees. And in this situation, I guess I might be expanding it a little bit unfairly. It doesn't say Sadducees, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law are there. And so they come up from all over the place, and they are seeing Jesus do miraculous stuff. So while this is going on, some men came carrying a paralytic on a mat and tried to take him into the house to lay him before Jesus. But much like a romantic comedy from 1995, when they could not find a way to do this because of the crowd, they had to find a solution. And again, much like a romantic comedy, they just get loud and do something socially unusual, but very, very brave, because they can't let this moment pass. They need to proclaim their faith. They need to ask this thing of Jesus. So they went up on the roof and lowered him on his mat through the tiles into the middle of the crowd, right in front of Jesus. So you can kind of picture this thing where Jesus is sitting there teaching, and he's doing his stuff, and he's healing people. We don't know exactly how, I don't think. He's present for him to heal the sick, I guess. And all of a sudden, just oh, hey, like there's some dude that just appeared out of nowhere. Now you might be thinking like this is a really dumpy house in order for there to be a hole in the roof big enough that you could just cram a guy through it. But what you really have here is probably a pretty wealthy household. This would be in the Mediterranean Latin domus style of household. And you see this sometimes still in Latin America, places with a little warmer climate, where you've got kind of a central courtyard that would be a gathering place for the multiple generations that would live under one roof in one ancient world household. And then, you know, it's vented cleverly, including the open roof that maybe brings in rainwater, or even, waters a little atrium or garden or something like that, and it vents everything. It's a surprisingly cool place if designed properly in a very hot climate. So everybody would have been able to picture this in the original audience. And the roof wouldn't have been difficult to access, like when you're a kid and you're trying to sneak up onto the roof of your elementary school and drink beer and get in trouble or whatever it is that you used to do. This was more like there were probably stairs, and so they just walked up there. And so they make this bold move. The part about lowering the guy on the mat through the roof, as best as I can tell, that would have been socially unusual in the first century, in the same way that would be socially unusual now. I mean, just think about it this way. How sure would you have to be in order to interrupt something that is such a spectacle, that has so many people excited, with something as weird as dropping your buddy in by some ropes right into the middle of the stage, right into the middle of the action? It feels very uncomfortable when you do something on accident that interrupts a gathering or a ceremony. I mean, a little burp or a cough or a fart or something, like everybody kind of notices, and you don't feel good about it. You get somebody who's socially awkward, and they like interact with a part of the speech that you're not supposed to interact with. That feels really weird. Feels really weird when everybody's clapping and then you're the one that does the last clap. It feels really weird when you're singing a song together collectively as a group, but you don't understand the cadence of it yet, and you come in too early. It just feels weird. And those are little innocent things. How sure do you have to be of this moment, and that you got to talk to Jesus right now to take this bold a move? And one of the themes that we're seeing so far in Luke here is the idea of people assuming this right position before God. The leper in the previous passage did that. He fell at the feet of Jesus, fell at his knees, as an expression Luke uses. And so, Luke is trying to make the larger point that Jesus was wrongly convicted, that he is king, that he is God in the flesh, and that he's worthy of worship. And so all of the official, powerful type people, with a few exceptions that Jesus affirms, overwhelmingly assume the improper position before Jesus, one of amusement or rivalry or trying to lord authority over him. But the people who get it, even the people who are really unimpressive, even the people who are anathema like the leper, they assume a proper position before a king, before one who has such authority as Jesus. And so the act of doing this is an act of faith. It's one of saying, I'm sure enough to utterly embarrass myself and make this really uncomfortable, to, rom-com style, to jump out in front of everybody and say how things are and what I feel and what I believe and what I want to see happen. Well, Jesus views it as faith. When Jesus saw their faith, he said, and this part is so weird, because what you expect him to say next, if you're not cheating ahead, is, friend, you're healed. But he doesn't. He says, friend, your sins are forgiven. Well, Jesus saw their faith. That's a good thing. Jesus is generally pro-faith. So why are we talking about sins? They just did something good. Well, I think this gets us into the bigger picture of really what is sin. Of course, the most automatic way that we think of it when we pick up a Bible is naughtiness, like bad behavior, says some naughty words, you're mean, maybe you took something that wasn't yours, whatever it might be. And look, those things count. It's in here. I mean, the Bible definitely describes the life of a person who follows God as being changed by the presence of God in their life, and that some of those impulses toward destructive things get replaced by impulses toward the values of Jesus and the values of his kingdom. But sin is more than that biblically. Sin is also a state of being that we're born into, and you can't help what you were born into. Sin is an inherited state of fallenness and brokenness that is received from the first sinners, Adam and Eve, and handed down genetically through birth and through the fallenness of the larger environment, and it affects everything. Second law of thermodynamics, entropy, stuff is breaking down. The biblical theological description of this would be, well, that's the result of sin. And you have sin that isn't really anybody's fault. You didn't do it to somebody. Nobody did it to you. It just happened because institutionally the world is broken as well. And so there's some interesting theology right here in verse 20 when Jesus leads with, friend, your sins are forgiven, because he's addressing, I think, something much better than just, or much bigger rather than just individual naughtiness. Well, something even more unexpected happens here. People aren't impressed by this gesture of grace. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law began thinking to themselves, who's this fellow who speaks blasphemy? Who can forgive sins but God alone? Well, I don't think it's blasphemy to offer forgiveness, but yeah, you know what? Maybe they have a point. Maybe it would be a bit of an overstep to make a general statement of remission of sins so broad if you didn't have some kind of authority to do it. But their conclusion is kind of funny and ironic, right? Who can forgive sins but God alone? And then implicit here, it's not written, is like, obviously he's not God. So he couldn't be that. So he's just some guy who can break the laws of time and space to heal people and fix things that are broken, but much like God does. But he's not God, obviously. Okay, well, you know what? In sympathy to where these guys are coming from, in defense of where these guys are coming from, it would take a lot for me at this point to see someone doing something even that looked miraculous and me to be like, you know what, I bet that's God. So, okay, this is a difficult equation, but it's interesting that their knee-jerk response is anger. We're mad, we're going to defend the fort, and we need to defend it against this guy who has committed the following offenses. Let me see. He healed a bunch of people who were sick and made their lives better. He gave thanks and praise to God, the same God we worship, for that. And he offered grace and forgiveness and redemption to people. Like that just, when you put it that way, they look really stupid here. And it demonstrates how backwards their whole religion has their thinking, because they're throwing a fit about idiotic things, and their religious expectations and the stuff that they have constructed in their brain is so big and so powerful that it is obscuring their ability to see inarguably good, inarguably God-ish things happening right in front of their face. So Jesus knew what they were thinking, and he asked, why are you thinking these things in your hearts? Which is easier to say, your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up and walk? And the Hebrew brain works a little bit differently than the non-Hebrew us brain, but I think I'm tracking with what he's doing here. He's creating a dichotomy between something that is immaterial, invisible, unmeasurable, and something that is the opposite of all of those things, very measurable and concrete. And in posing the question, I'm not really sure what the actual answer is between the two. Because it would seem, given all that God did in his redemptive plan that covers like all of this stuff here, and that Jesus would go to the cross and be resurrected for all of the forgiveness of sins thing to actually happen, maybe forgiving somebody's sins is actually the more difficult thing. Maybe it'd be more difficult to just command broken organic material to stitch itself back together and become functional in an instant. I'm really lucky that worked out. I've never tried snapping with my left hand before, but that was surprisingly effective. I could have had to redo this whole dang thing. So he sets up this dichotomy, which is bold, but then he gets even bolder. And he says, but that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, and then ... This would be the equivalent of like, okay, that you would know that I am not a young man. Ta-da. Behold. I mean, he's setting it up like, all right, I'm going to prove this thing to you. But he's also kind of calling his shot, right? This has a little bit of the Babe Ruth. Let me see. Wait. This would be right. Babe Ruth pointing to right field and calling his shot and hitting a home. I mean, how stupid does he look there if he fouls out to the third baseman on the next pitch? You better deliver if you're going to be doing stuff like that. So imagine if Jesus is like, but to prove, and effectively what he's saying here is, I am the Son of God. To prove that I am the Son of God and that you guys are wrong and that all these bystanders who are gathered here to see what I'm about, to prove that that stuff is real, get up and take your mat and walk. Hey, how much would it have ruined everything if the guy was like, I don't know. I guess I'm still not feeling it. Could you do it again? Could you do the gesture a second time? Yeah, I was rusty. Haven't been doing this for a while. I kind of got a little bit tight. Get up and take your mat and walk. It's still not. I got nothing. Like my arms are still like they were, but I got nothing. You guys just want to get me out of here. It's embarrassing. He has to deliver on this thing. And then, well, he does. He said to the paralyzed man, I tell you, get up, take your mat and go home. Immediately, come on, I got another one. Yes. He stood up in front of them, took what he had been lying on, and went home praising God. Everyone was amazed and gave praise to God. They were filled with awe and said, we have seen remarkable things today. If you get used to the pattern in the Gospels, what you automatically expect next is that the religious leaders are all mad and they want to kill him. And we do get to that in a little bit, but instead it says everyone was amazed and gave praise to God. So we get a little glance at what is going to be the big friction of this story in Luke between Jesus and the religious establishment. But at this point, there's just nothing anybody can say. And it's almost like they have to go and regroup to be like, all right, guys, like in the moment, I know we all acted really excited and like that was great, but we are mad, right? Oh, yeah, we're definitely mad because what he did was obviously bad and wrong, right? Yeah, definitely. And we all know why, right? Yeah, I just don't want to say it right now. We should go to the Pharisee bar and throw back a few and just humor each other and tell each other why that was obviously bad. I mean, it's like they have to calculate what went wrong because it's just inarguably good. And what it should deliver is hope. Not just, oh, wow, somebody feels better. As we read this, somebody feels better who's, still died 2,000 years ago. I mean, I guess that's good for them. I don't really know how that affects me. Well, the way it affects me and you and the way it affects everybody who's read it in between and the way it affected the original audience and the people who were in the room in the first place is that this could cause one to believe that all the other stuff that Jesus is about might also be true. If he has mastery over the physical world like this, does he have mastery over the spiritual world? Does he have mastery over the thing whose name we dare not even utter, but that is the time bomb that is waiting to go off for all of us, that being death? Could he beat that too? The Messiah is supposed to be able to beat that. Is that who this is? And so there is a hope that comes with it. And on my podcast recently, we did a whole episode just on the beginning of Matthew and the idea of, is it okay to hope that this thing is true as we read through this document? Like, what if all of these promises were true? What if God, who could deliver on this in front of a whole bunch of witnesses who could have refuted it, can also deliver on all the even bigger, more eternal promises? Now, look, we don't want to jump the gun. There's a whole lot of Luke left for him to make the case and for us to think that through. But this comes with a promise that is so much bigger than just, could God pull something off once a long time ago and now everybody's dead and we can't ask them? But I think the bigger thing here is the implication for us. The guy who got it right in this story is the one who was like, I don't care how stupid I look. I don't care how much it doesn't fit with the expectations of society and the world. I don't care that I can't even get in the doors of this place because it's so crowded up. I mean, he had an easier time getting out. I guarantee you the place parted for him. I don't care how dumb I look. I think this thing is true, and I want to get right up next to it and see if it might be, because I have faith that there's something to this. And his faith is rewarded. Will that reward look the same for you and me? I don't think it usually does. I think it looks bigger and better for people who come along after the fact and respond to this thing as well. Okay, we used to do this kind of stuff all the time, like talking about us now. We used to sit down and do videos where we worked our way right through the Bible. And what I found was that was a great way to include a small number of people who really wanted to get on the bike and ride for a real long time through one body of text. We did all of the book of Acts, like 90 some videos, right? And to those of you who've been there from the beginning, because that's where we started, and did all of that with me, you're awesome. I feel like we're old friends. This is great. But I also figured out that there was a whole lot more conversation that I wanted to have on this channel. So you've probably noticed that these kind of videos are a little more few and far between. What I figured out is that medium-wise, it worked a ton better to have this kind of conversation overwhelmingly happen in the podcast format. So I want to invite you to go and check out the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, anywhere you get podcasts on your phone, computer, whatever. It's just literally search the 10-Minute Bible Hour. It'll pop right up. There's a link down below in the description as well. We're about 40 episodes in at this point. I'm doing it every single day. They're about 10 minutes long, actually about 10 minutes long. I think the longest is like 12 minutes, shortest is like 7. And we're just working through the book of Matthew. And I mean, we are deep diving so much more than this into every little detail because we have time. And frankly, if I'm to be totally honest, it's a lot harder to put together a video than it is to put together a podcast. And I can pull those off every single day. Tons of people have shown up to be a part of it. I'm super grateful for that. But I wanted to invite you too. If you're not a part of it yet, I think it's a cool thing to add to the rhythm of your day. 10 minutes, deep dive, serious look at the Bible. Sometimes it's kind of academic-y, fun, abstract stuff. Sometimes it's kind of heart level implications of the text for you and me kind of stuff. But I'm growing from it. I'm having fun with it. 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. If you haven't checked it out yet, I'd be very grateful if you'd give it a go. And it won't be weird for you at all to just pick it up right in the middle. You can go back and get the rest later if you feel like it. Okay. Thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks for checking out the podcast. Can't wait to do more of this. I'm Matt. This is a 10-Minute Bible Hour. More to come.